All right, let's pick up where we left off. Last time, we peeled back the curtain on liberal capitalism. And what we found wasn't pretty. The system wasn't working for the nation, it was working for a tiny, powerful elite. The game was rigged. The whole thing, a racket. So if capitalism failed the common person, there was another god waiting in the wings, wasn't there? And this was the brutal verdict. You know Al Capone? He knew a thing or two about rackets, and he saw the system for exactly what it was. A game where a super rich elite uses lobbyists and campaign donations and this revolving door between government and big business to make sure the rules always serve them. Not the people, and certainly not the nation. So this is the million-dollar question, right? For a whole century, this was pitched as the great alternative. If capitalism grinds down the worker, then surely Marxist communism, the ideology built for the working class, had to be the answer. That was the promise made to millions of people. But here's what we need to figure out. Was it a real promise, or was it just another lie? Okay, so let's put communism on trial, and we're going to look at it through the eyes of its most vicious enemies, the fascists and the corporatists, because you can't even begin to understand their third path until you get why they saw Marxism as something way worse than a bad idea. To them, it was a criminal conspiracy against the nation itself. From their perspective, the entire problem with Marxism, the whole thing, boils down to this one idea: class struggle. Lenin was totally upfront about it. He said communist morality is all about one thing: winning the class war. It's not about what's right or wrong in some abstract sense, it's about what helps the working class win. This wasn't just a part of the ideology, it was the entire engine. And this, right here, this is where you see the collision. It's a total head-on conflict. See, Marxism tells a German worker that he has more in common with a factory worker in China than he does with his own German boss. But nationalism says the exact opposite. It says, no, your primary identity is German, and everyone, the worker and the owner, you have to unite for the good of the nation. One ideology wants to tear the nation apart from the inside, and the other wants to fuse it together no matter the cost. And here it is. This is Exhibit A in their trial against communism. The sources are clear. For the early revolutionary socialists, the whole idea of a fatherland or a country was just a trick used by the rich to control people. Their loyalty wasn't to a flag, it was to their class, a global class. The goal was never to fix the state, it was to watch the state die and be replaced by a worldwide revolution. Now, to a nationalist, that's not just a political disagreement, that is treason. So, the first charge was treason against the nation. But the attack didn't stop there. The next argument was that, on top of being destructive, the ideology itself was just fundamentally broken. It was a utopian fantasy that, in the real world, was nothing more than a blueprint for total failure. And this was the ultimate sales pitch, right? This was the dream. After the revolution, after a temporary dictatorship of the proletariat crushes the ownership class, the state itself, that whole structure of oppression, wouldn't be needed anymore. It would just wither away. And what's left would be this perfect, classless, harmonious world. But just look at what actually happened. Look at the Soviet Union. Look at communist China. Did the state ever wither? No way. It became an all-powerful totalitarian monster. The real-world result was the exact opposite of what the theory promised. The machine that was designed to dismantle itself just grew bigger and scarier. So what did these so-called communist states actually become? Well, to compete on the world stage, to industrialize, just to survive, they were forced to adopt something called state capitalism. The state had to become the ultimate capitalist, the one and only owner of everything. This was no worker's paradise. It was a giant, nationalized corporate machine run by bureaucrats. And here's the final blow. The architects of these systems, guys like Lenin, and even Mussolini looking on, they basically admitted it themselves. Call it state socialism, call it state capitalism. Who cares? The result is the same: the total government takeover of the entire economy. The original Marxist idea had completely failed the test of reality. It just didn't work. Okay, so let's just pause and think about where this leaves us. Liberal capitalism? A racket run by the wretch. Marxist communism? A failed anti-national ideology that doesn't even work in practice. So, what's left? Well, out of the ashes of these two failed systems, the dictators of the 20th century stepped forward to present their own solution, a new way, the third path. And their pitch, you have to admit, was incredibly clever. First, they'd look at the socialists and say, "You're right, capitalism is exploitative, and we have to protect the little guy." So they promised to deliver the goals of socialism, things like social welfare and job security. But, and this is the absolute masterstroke, they violently rejected the methods of socialism. No more class war, no international revolution. Instead, they would use the absolute power of the state to force all the classes to stop fighting each other and work for one thing, and one thing only, the nation. And this was the powerful new dream they were selling. Forget a classless society, they offered a national folk community. The whole idea was to make you forget your class identity completely. You are not a worker first or a business owner first. You are a German first, an Italian first. Your personal goals, your old loyalties, they mean nothing. The only thing that matters is the destiny of the national community. So how do you actually achieve that kind of total unity? Well, you do it through a ruthless process called synchronization. And it means exactly what it sounds like. Every single part of society, every business, every union, every sports club, every church had to be brought under the absolute control of the state. There were no private spaces left, no independent groups. Every single gear in the social machine had to turn in perfect sync with the will of the state. And the model they built to make all this happen, you could call it a developmental dictatorship. Yeah, it was brutal, but from their point of view, it was also intensely pragmatic. The goal was to take a nation they saw as fractured and weak and use the raw power of the state to slam the fast-forward button on modernization, to catch up with and eventually crush their rivals. So let's pull all these threads together. We've seen the diagnosis, how both capitalism and communism failed. We've seen the proposed solution, this forced unity of the national community. And now we get to the final, chilling verdict, the core philosophy that makes the whole terrifying thing tick. Now, from the third path point of view, both liberalism and Marxism were sick with the same disease, individualism. They saw liberal capitalism as the ego of the rich guy putting his personal profit before the nation. And they saw Marxism as the ego of the class putting its group interests before the nation. So their solution? Destroy the very idea of the individual. They argued that you, as an individual, have no meaning, no rights, no purpose at all outside of your role in the great national organism. And this is the final twisted move. The state is no longer just a referee or an administrator. It becomes the ethical state. It's a spiritual creation. It literally embodies the soul and destiny of the nation. And if that's true, then your highest moral calling isn't personal happiness or your own freedom. It's duty. It's self-sacrifice. Your entire purpose is to serve the state because by serving the state, you serve the immortal life of your people. And this is what it all comes down to. This is the brutal deal offered by the third path. It promises to end the chaos, the exploitation, the division. It promises national strength, power, and a shared purpose. But the price tag? Well, the price is everything. It costs you your freedom, your individuality, your conscience. The price is your total, absolute submission to a totalitarian state. And that's the question that sits at the heart of the 20th century's darkest chapter. Was this a genuine, if twisted, attempt to find a third way out of a broken world? Or was it just the most effective blueprint for total control that humanity has ever devised? That's the puzzle they left for us to solve.